many people to come. Andy said earlier, I thought you were going to be like upstairs in one of those little rooms. And I said, I don't know. People wanted to come to a slideshow presentation. So I'll get started, and I think I have a good little breaking point in just a few minutes. But let me just start out by saying a couple things. Hey, Bonnie, will you stop and just say hello? There's Bonnie back there. Say hello to Bonnie. Many of you know the Taylors. They spent 2 years in Israel. And Bonnie asked if she could put some things on a display table back there. And so that's what's in the back. Those are all her personal items. None of those are mine. But you'll see some pictures of the old city, Jerusalem, or some paintings. You'll see family history of Jesus there on that kind of family tree that is the tallest picture. There's some coins. There's a nativity scene. There's an oil lamp. What else is back there? Yes, there's a couple salt little crystal balls. I don't know what those are called, but back there as well. Anything else I'm missing? Some sand coral. It's random stuff. So if you need to know more specifics, Bonnie's the one to ask. I'm sure she'd love to talk to you about all that she knows about those things, but also just her 2 years there. She spent a lot more time there than I did. My wife and I got a chance to go to Israel. We were there for 3 weeks, and so I know some things, but not as much as Bonnie, and so she's a great resource. Also, just want to let you know that I'm planning to do a trip with our church, probably not next year, but the spring of 2025. And so I've had probably at this point dozens of people ask me or say, hey, oh man, we would love to go. You know, we've been thinking about going, or we've been saving up money, or we're planning to go. I know there's some people here tonight that are going this fall. And so just tuck that in the back of your head. I know Bonnie even told me tonight, hey, I'd love to be part of helping lead a trip. And so I'll do I've got some more research to do. I'll probably bend Bonnie's ear as well. And I'm planning to do that, like I said, spring of 2025. And so save your pennies. Right now it's probably looking like $5,000 to $7,000 a person. And that'll probably go up. So yay. Because, you know, things go up in price. So let me just start by sharing a couple things here. This is a picture of like a satellite picture of modern Israel. This is just from Google. You might recognize that up on the screen there. You have the Gaza Strip. You might be able to see Jerusalem. The bigger of the two lakes, that's the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee is up at the top. That might be a little hard to see from where you're at. That big body of water, that's the Mediterranean, up to the upper left corner. Okay, so this is the current country of Israel. Most of the maps you see in your Bible of the country of Israel are in that same general location. And it is not that big. It's actually probably a lot smaller than you would imagine. It's a lot smaller than I would imagine. I had imagined before I went. I thought, oh, how big is that? It's about 50 miles, and the north end of that stretch up there is about 50 miles from east to west. It's about 250 miles north to south. And that's about the same from north to south of the whole state of Oregon. The widest part where you see Gaza cut off all the way to the Dead Sea, that's only about 75 miles width. And so if we were to take our state, Oregon, you see Portland up there, all the way down to Medford and Klamath Falls, and you took the whole country, that's where it would fit. We're looking at basically the Willamette Valley extended further south. It's really tight. Most of the stories you read about in the Bible took place really in tight proximity to one another, and except for those stories where people are coming from the north to attack, or the gospel's spreading out to Athens and Egypt, and then we get to stretch the map out pretty wide. So just to give you some more reference, so that heart right there, that's where we're at. That's Staten. It's probably my home in Sublimity, but that's the heart. Google knows everything, right? And if we were to put some of the prominent cities that you know about and that I got to visit, my wife and I got to visit. Oh, I was going to put, that's the Sea of Galilee right there, that little blue speck. And then this would be the Dead Sea, kind of down in the Eugene area. This would be Jerusalem, right there. Jerusalem, that would put you about Harrisburg. There's people from Harrisburg here. Whoop, whoop, okay. Okay, if we would be kind of in the middle, if we were sitting in Israel and Jerusalem was down in Harrisburg, we'd be just north of it, not too far. And Bethlehem, maybe like Junction City, would be 5 miles away. Bethlehem and Jerusalem, just 5 miles away. Up north, where Jesus was raised in Nazareth, that's just consider that to be like St. Paul. That's about how far away Jerusalem is from Nazareth. And another 20 miles, and you're on the edge of the northern end of the Sea of Galilee in Capernaum. That's where Jesus' ministry was based for most of his ministry. So look how tight that window is. I mean, it's 65 miles from Jerusalem to Nazareth. Most of the stories you know about Jesus' ministry happened right there, right in that small stretch of land. This is, if we were to go back to our map, the Google map there, this stretch right here, this is known as the land between the land. It's, of course, as many of you know, it's been fought over for centuries, millennia. It is the very hub of all of life in the East, from sea to land travel, from Egypt to Asia, up into Rome and all of Europe. It is right at the crux into India and all the way into East Asia. And so it was and still is a very pivotal piece of land. And as you know, many of you that follow the news, it's been fought over, and it has such religious significance not only for the Jews and, of course, for Christians, but for Islams and a bunch of religions that are trying to claim their stake on the land. And so that's just a little bit of land. I want to show you some pictures and tell you some stories about some of the things we got to experience. This is looking from the east part of the old city of Jerusalem. So think around the Temple Mount. Many of you are familiar with that gold dome that you've seen maybe pictures of, the one that the Islams control and their mosque is on top. A lot of fighting over that over the years. But this is looking east, okay? So if you're thinking of that map, we're inland from the Mediterranean Sea, and we're moving towards the current modern country of Jordan. We're looking east. And when you look east from the city of Jerusalem, you're looking towards the Mount of Olives. I've got some scribbles here. I took notes sometimes on our trip in my phone. I'd zoom in, and then I'd use one of those markup things and just write with my finger, so you'll get to see what it looks like to, write like a little kid, I guess. So that's the south end. We're kind of looking south and east. That's the south end of the Mount of Olives. So I think of the Temple Mount, down the valley. That's the Kidron Valley. You might have heard that in the New Testament. Kidron Valley, or even Old Testament, down and then back up, and that's the Mount of Olives. So think of all those stories you think of Jesus, his last week, the Passion Week, about him going out of the city to the Mount of Olives. He's not taking a super long trip. I was doing some, Google Maps has this feature you can measure things. You can click a spot, measure it at another spot, and click again. It's, depending on where you go on the Mount of Olives, this is probably 4/10, 3/10, maybe to 5/6 of a mile, half a mile. Get half a mile, give or take, we'll say. This is about the same distance if you went up to the hilltop here by the Key Bank, that newer strip mall with I think it's got a Verizon store, and you look down and then back up to Power Chevrolet, Les Schwab, and Sigmund's. That's the distance we're talking about. If that was the Temple Mount that King Herod the Great built, and you look down and then back up to the Mount of Olives, we're just looking into just the front edge of Sublimity, the south end of Sublimity. Super tight. Off to the right, that's the Hinnom Valley. This is, in Hebrew, it's the guy Ben Hinnom. Okay, that's in the New Testament. That's what Jesus references and uses as a picture for hell. So think of Matthew 5, I think Matthew 15, I believe. The word Gehenna, that's referencing that valley off to the right. And so when Jesus references it, and why some people get a little confused when it comes to hell, that doctrine of, is hell a real thing? Is that just a parable or just an analogy? just a picture of separation from God, or is that really Jesus is using a real life physical location and saying, when you are living in a way that is separate from God, and your measurement of whatever righteousness you think you have is measured up to God's, you will be like in a place like this valley. So when you're up on the old city of Jerusalem, you're looking down the Kidron Valley back up to the Mount of Olives, and you're on the southwest side, you're looking back down the Hinnom Valley. It's a pretty deep drop, but history buffs would tell us it's probably been filled up over the years with debris, garbage. But back in Jesus' day, it was even sharper, and at the bottom, they just burned their garbage. And there's fires going constantly, and even stories of child sacrifice down there to gods that were not biblical gods, not Yahweh of the Bible. So when Jesus references them, those places, Matthew 23 actually is the place. When he says, like, woe to you scribes, you Pharisees, you hypocrites, you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter in. And he talks about them being like kids who are being burned. He's talking about a very specific, real-life scenario that he and his people and everyone who heard him say, you're going to be down in the Hinnom Valley. They all went, oh, no one wants to go there. That's where they burn trash. That's where the pagans do their worship and sacrifice kids to their pagan gods. When he says, woe to you, and then says that's their destiny. So when I was there, this was like the first day we're there, and we're learning about this valley, I'm going, oh my gosh. That gives this place of hell and this picture of hell that I have in mind a brand new kind of swath of understanding for me when I'm thinking of just the danger of not only being separated from God for eternity, but just the real life picture of a garbage heap burning forever that Jesus says, this is the place people go when they turn their backs on God, when they have not been redeemed by him, and when they live a life apart from him. So that's just one example. Let me keep going. I've got so many pictures and so many things to talk about, and I think we're still waiting on some potatoes. Yes, okay, we're still ahead of our break. So this is looking back from the Mount of Olives. Okay, so we're standing on the Mount of Olives now. We're looking back to Jerusalem. So the valley that we were looking down and back up to the Mount of Olives, now we're looking down and back up, and that's the Temple Mount. In Jesus' day, there was a temple for Yahweh built by Herod, and on top of it, it didn't look like that, but now there's that dome of the rock up there. Okay, so that's that view of Jerusalem looking back. We're not on Mount of Olives, Mount Scopus, so we're a little bit further north, but looking back down and then back up, all the way down into the valley, then back up. You can see from here, this is the old city wall. You can kind of see to the left side of the screen and then moving right. That goes all around the old city. That was... Old City Jerusalem is on the far east side of current-day Jerusalem. Everything east of this point is like modern Jerusalem. You step outside those old city walls, and you're a very modern city. Modern transportation, food, clothes, entertainment. But in the old city, it's this old, ancient kind of feel because of the stone cobbled streets, the stone walls. It feels like you're in a fortified city. And the narrow little access points in between all the businesses and places to stay and eat. And so this is looking back, again, from the east, looking back west. And then if you just turn and look south from different vantage points, this is from the same area, just me turning 90 degrees and looking south. This is looking at what would be the very, very edge of the wilderness. Okay, so people would say this is where the land of the shepherd kind of meets the land of the farmer. And the farmer spent his time in pastures and places where water was more readily available. And the shepherd was out closer to the edge of that and on the edge of the wilderness. So you think of the stories of David or you think of even the references that Jesus makes to God being our shepherd. You think of John 10 and other passages throughout the New and Old Testament. And God is as much depicted as a shepherd, or even more so than he is as a farmer. And so when you heard those stories in old ancient Israel as a Jewish boy or Jewish girl, you would just look at the wilderness, or you would know family members. You would have people in your community who this was their existence, was following sheep around in kind of more desert wasteland areas, trying to find the resources needed to survive, trying to find water, trying to find vegetation, and every day was a battle and a struggle just to survive and keep your sheep alive. So there's that look, that direction. This is looking west towards Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. So Mount Scopus, a little bit north of the city of Jerusalem. Mount of Olives, we're moving back south. And this is looking directly down the Mount of Olives. You can see some of the trees kind of as you descend the hill and then back up. That's the southeast corner of the old city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount right there. And you can see back behind, that's the modern city I mentioned. That's all Jerusalem. If you kept traveling another 70 miles, you're going to be in the Mediterranean Sea, Tel Aviv, where you fly in from the airport and all that stuff. And so these are all Jewish tombs here. It's a whole hillside of Jewish tombs, thousands of them. You can also see those if you're on the Temple Mount looking back east. That's looking that way. I'm going to skip through this. We already oh, there it is. There's the reference. Matthew 23, 13, and 15. I forgot to put this in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of Gehenna. That's that valley, the reference. You make him a child of Gehenna as yourselves. There's that word, in the original Greek. If you heard that or read that, you would instantly go, I know where that is. That's like us saying, you got some stuff to take the dump, go down bottom of OCI Hill and go a little bit back up the mountain, drop off your paint, put your, take your dishwasher, throw it in the heat pile, take your rubber, whatever, and put it there, and you never get to see it again. If we had one word for that, that's the same thing that Jesus does right here. This is, yeah. Oh, are we good? Yes. Okay, let me get to a stopping point. Thank you. I cannot see much of anything. I thought you were going to throw it at me. Someone said it was going to be hot potato, and I was supposed to catch it. So, okay. One more minute, we'll be at a good stopping point. This is also looking back towards the Mount of Olives. And then at the bottom, underneath these structures, houses, and some of these businesses that are on this hillside, at the very base of that, you can't really see from this picture, but if you're on a phone or a computer, you could zoom in. That's an Iron Age tomb. And surrounding this area are olive gardens. There's one olive garden that's been set up to remember Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And then I'll pause and we'll kind of leave you with a cliffhanger. I want to talk about these Iron Age tombs, kind of fascinating to me. This is outside of a church that commemorates Jesus being in the Garden of Gethsemane. So they have a garden of olive trees. These trees are, what was it? 800 years old? Yeah. Some of these trees date back 800 years. And you get to walk through it, very peaceful, very serene, and all the hustle and bustle is kind of drown out as you walk through this garden. And you can just imagine, this doesn't necessarily, there's no strong proof that this is actually where Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, but you can go to that place and imagine Jesus as he's on his last moments on earth, as he's crying out to the Father, as he's sweating blood and he's going through the agony of soon-to-be crucifixion and separation from the Father. And he's sitting in the middle of this ancient olive garden, the Garden of Gethsemane. And the hustle and bustle of the city of Jerusalem and the temple is far enough away that he has a moment, several moments, long extended time as his disciples are struggling to stay with him, of just him and the Father, right in the middle of this garden, in the middle of the scene of the Passion Week. And so, again, that's across from the Temple Mount, down valley, back up, and then we'll get to this little Iron Age tomb in just a few moments. So, do you have any special instructions back there for this, or can we just line up and grab and go? Okay, I'll just pretend like I can dismiss people like I know what's happening. But how about if you're over here, like from Bonnie? Bonnie, raise your hand again. If you're over here, why don't you guys go ahead and go first and get us going? And once we get through people grabbing their stuff and kind of situated maybe 10 minutes or so, we'll kind of pick it back up, and I'll share some more pictures, some more thoughts, and some scripture. Yeah, tray hands all the way back up to here and over. You guys go ahead and get in line. Help yourself. Looks like maybe 5 more minutes or so. We'll get restarted. All right, if you're waiting to get in line, I think now's a good time. We'll get started soon-ish. All right, we're gonna get jumping back in. The last of our people are getting their food. Thanks for being patient, and I'm sure it's easier with food, so that's good. Any questions anyone had so far? I don't know if I'll have answers for you, but yeah. How do they get 6 million people in there? I don't know. What do we have in the state? 4 million here? Yeah, we're a little bit more spread out, aren't we? We have 9 million? Oh, 9 million in Israel. Gotcha. She's asking me how many people, how do they get so many people in such a small area? I don't know, but it didn't feel crazy crowded. I mean, the city is a city, right? But there's still a ton of open space. I'll have some pictures coming up where it's just nothing. It's just wasteland. That same desert and wilderness that Israel walked around in is still there. It's very much there. So, yeah, good question. But I don't know. Okay, we'll jump back in. Okay, so I mentioned this Iron Age tomb. There's a little circle there. It's probably super hard to see. In fact, you probably can't see it from your seat. I mentioned this in church this morning, these different layers. This is looking at the old city Jerusalem wall. This has been built over centuries. And so on the left there is bedrock, on the right is bedrock as well. Around 200 BC are those stones that are in between the two bedrocks. As you move up, that next layer is around 1000 AD, and then the top is around 1500 AD. So in other words, even the top of this structure is older than anything you'll see structure-wise here in America. You just think the bottom layer has been there for 2,200 years. It's pretty wild. And so those are different eras, different building styles, different ways, but built upon one another. And at the base of this wall, this is on the west, not the West Temple Mount wall, because you might get that confused. The Western Wall, the weeping, wailing wall that you can go and say your prayers and see the Jews there wailing and submitting their prayers, crying out to God. This is the city wall. Think of the whole city wall that it goes around the whole old city. This is the western wall of the city wall, not the Temple Mount wall. Maybe I'll have another picture that will help clarify that. But anyways, at the bottom of that, you can see some of the stones up above. This is an old Iron Age tomb. This is the entrance. You had to get real small to get in, and then it kind of opens up. And think Iron Age, think like 1200 BC. This is the patriarchal kind of era in your Bible. This is like the Old Testament, like the old parts of the Old Testament, getting back to some of the patriarchs. And so the process of this, I have another picture actually. This is these are ossuary boxes inside of this is Absalom's tomb in a different area outside the city. Let me go back here. The process of this was someone would pass away, and there was rooms inside these tombs. They were think cave-like, and with different little outcroppings inside of a cave. And if you had a loved one that passed away, especially if you're, I think, of a certain economic status, you would take the body and you would lay it down on a table or a slab, and the body would decompose for around a year. You would come back and you would gather the bones, and then you would put it in one of these boxes. And that's what your remains were buried in. So think back to some of those Old Testament stories you know of. Joseph, for instance, when he's on his last days of life and he's about to pass away, and he says, I want you to take my bones back to my fathers. You see that, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, you see that kind of as a theme in the Old Testament. Take me back to the land that I'm from. And this is what they're saying. Like, they weren't taking a big, huge tomb like we use nowadays. They were taking just the basic remains, the bones, the skeletal bones of their loved ones. I thought that was really fascinating. Kind of gave me new insight. The people, as you can imagine, in Israel are much more attached, at least historically, at least biblically, much more attached to the land. I'm attached to the Northwest. I'm born here, raised here. I don't plan on going anywhere. But I don't think I'm attached to the land like they were. Like they found their sustenance from it. It was also promised by God. And it meant something where they came from, where they were going, and where they were going to be returned to. And it's very different from a lot of us. Probably a little closer to home here in small town, where a lot of us born and raised here, or we have roots here and we want to stay here. But foreign to most of American culture. Let me show you another picture. Hey, that's me. This is the Hezekiah's tunnel. The story of Hezekiah's tunnel, there's some of it that's just been passed down, kind of almost folklore. Some of it, you see snippets in the Bible, which is really cool. So the story is Hezekiah was a king in the Old Testament, and the Assyrians are coming from the north. They are the world power at the time. They are kind of knocking on the door. They're on the doorstep, getting ready to take over the city of Jerusalem and all of Israel. At times, they do take different parts of the people of God into captivity. At this moment in time, Jerusalem specifically, where Hezekiah is at, is is on high alert for the attacks of the Assyrians. And one of their main concerns is outside of the city walls of Jerusalem was their source of water, the Gihon spring that came out of the side of a hill, and that's how they got their water to drink, to grow their fruits and veggies, and to sustain life. That was it. That was the source. It flowed out the side of this hill, but it was outside the walls of the city. And so the story is that Hezekiah sent two crack teams, one on one side of this hill and one on the other side, one on the outside of the city, one on the inside, told them to dig a tunnel and meet in the middle to get the water to flow into the city to sustain life in case there was this major attack from the Assyrians. Here's a picture of us walking through this tunnel that's still there today. I have a video. I'm going to see if this will play, give you an idea. There it is. Yes, even sound. So right here about ankle, lower calf deep, it gets all the way up to, your knees and almost mid-thigh at point. And right now, as you can see, like at points you're kind of ducking, making sure you're not going to hit your head. A lot of the times, or several times, there's 15, 20 feet tall. And when you get kind of halfway, there's this weird zigzagging back and forth, and you can see the marks of people like going from one end to the other, and you can see the marks of axes or something picking away at the sides of these walls. And then the middle, zigzagging back and forth until they found each other. Like there's some signage at the entrance of this spring when you start the tunnel and walk towards the end of it, kind of into the old city or where it used to be. And you could just kind of see that they were figuring things out, and these signs say that they could hear each other. They could hear the other people trying to find, the other group. And so you kind of you can tell they're like going this way, and nope, that's not it. And then they cut back, and it kind of zigzags back and forth, and then you end up out the other side. It took us, 30 minutes or so to walk through this. And some people in our group said, no, thanks. I'm not interested in that. And some of us said, well, let's do it. And then you get halfway through, and you go, you have to fight your mind to say, what is the worst thing that could happen in the middle of this tunnel? You just go, no, I'm just going to keep walking, one foot in front of the other, and if at least there's water here. If we get trapped, maybe I can drink for a while, as long as it doesn't fill up over my head. Then you go, no, and you just keep walking. So here's one of those scriptures. This is 2 Kings 20:20. The rest of the deeds of Hezekiah and all his might, and how he made the pool and the conduit and brought water into the city. Are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Judah? That could be a reference to what happened, this kind of miracle. Here's another one. Same Hezekiah closed the upper outlet of the waters of the Gihon. That's that spring that I'm talking about. Directed them to go to the west side of the city of David. And Hezekiah prospered in all his works. And so it's really cool. I mean, the story is fascinating. It's amazing to think that people, 3,000 years ago, cut through a hill from two sides and somehow met in the middle and got the water to flow inside the city. And then it's still there. You can still see the effects of people, digging through it, and it's still flowing. The water's still flowing. You can walk through, and it comes out the other side. And that city of David that's referenced there in your Bibles, you see the city of Zion, the city of David, Jerusalem. Sometimes those are all interchangeable. A lot of times they are. What I'm talking about and what I'm referencing in the old city Jerusalem is, this is going to get confusing. There's a very modern city of Jerusalem. When I said look over the old city, the walls, the Dome of the Rock, and see the skyscrapers, that's like modern, modern cars, shops, restaurants. I was amazed. There's like Columbia Sportswears all over Israel. And so I was like, well, this is weird. All the way from Oregon over here. And then there's what is known as Old Jerusalem, that city, that walled city with a dome. But really the city of David that's mentioned here is an even older city that's actually down from the Temple Mount as you kind of start heading down into those valleys. And they are just now, the last, from what I understand, 20 years, really figuring out what that city looked like and how it was set up And so a lot of the Old Testament is talking about the city of David. It's actually talking about something that's not even in the city walls. It's actually down, further down, kind of this slope. So anyway, that's just a little side note. That city of David is probably talking about underneath the modern old city Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. But anyways, we'll keep moving along. This is another little picture of Hezekiah. Hopefully when I get a chance to go back, this will be dug out more. There's a current excavation. This inside that old city wall structure where the Dome of the Rock is and all that stuff. And they're digging up what was a quickly built wall during Hezekiah's time. Again, the Assyrians were coming, and Hezekiah said, we've got to build something to protect ourselves. Because the city was really lower, and where the Temple Mount is now and even further up kind of flattens out, the city of David, the old city of David, was actually not in a military safe haven spot. There's room above them, and you never want middle ground or low ground, and they definitely didn't have high ground. And so everyone came together. The story is everyone came together and they built the city walls. You just imagine the whole community of God's people hastily putting rocks together and trying to figure out how to put them, just everyone, not masonry people, not people who are skilled labor. It was just like everyone's got to chip in. People my age and younger don't really know what that's like. Some of you in the room, you maybe heard your parents talk about how everyone chipped in during World War II. You know, everyone in America chipped in. Kids, wives, nurses, doctors, teachers, past, everyone chipped in for the war. Everyone figured out what to do with their metal to get it to the right place. And that's the kind of mentality that was happening here. My little scribbler just says Hezekiah fortification of the north walls of Jerusalem. These are, again, I shared a little bit about this morning, but these are some stones that we highlighted. I'm probably going to just skip through this. You can listen to this morning's sermon. But that's about 30 feet long. It's about 3 feet high. This is a tunnel underneath the Temple Mount. Those walls, again, about 30 feet long, about 3 feet high. And just amazing. These sit, just to give you a reference point, these sit under like the western wall, Weeping Whale wall. So here's one picture I took of that wall. You enter kind of the left of that railing there if you're a male. You can't quite see it, but there's 3 umbrellas on the right, kind of back in the distance. On the right side of that, if you're looking at, as we look at this picture, that's the women's section. And you get to wear a little thing on top of your head to make sure you're sticking with the customs. Little what's that? Oh, I thought I heard something. Anyways, you get to wear a little hat with the rest of the Jewish folks and go up to the wall there and do what you need to do, pray and cry out to God. So anyways, that stone from that last picture is sitting underneath that wall. What you see here is an amazingly high, ancient wall, hundreds of years old, but underneath it is stone, like building block stones that are even more impressively large, and you get down there and you think, how the heck did they get this here? Like, how did they move something? I mean, it's got to weigh several hundred or thousands of pounds. How did they get this here and set it? And a lot of those stones, like the picture I showed you where it had the little red brackets, there's no mortar. They're just tight, like just the tightest lines in between them. Amazing that happened so long ago, and they're still standing. This is one of a couple places, as we kind of toured around the old city of Jerusalem, where some folks say this might be where Jesus went up and was tempted. If he was tempted from kind of in and around the city, this might have been where he was taken to a high place and he looked out over and was tempted. Another one is this. These are all up on the Temple Mount now. As we know it now. This is another one, and you can see the guy standing there compared to the wall. This is several stories up, a few stories up. So yeah, another possible area Jesus was tempted as he looked out with Satan over the city, as he looked out over what could have been his, as Satan would put it. A couple more, not a couple more, but we'll just keep rolling. We'll see how much we can get through. I got a lot of slides, a lot of pictures. This is looking into the Celt Canyon. alongside the ascent of Adamim. So this is the route from Jerusalem to Jericho. You're kind of heading towards the Dead Sea. You're heading out, past the Mount of Olives. You're heading east. This is the likely route that's still intact today, that Jesus bases his story of the Good Samaritan from. And so you're thinking, at this point, you're thinking wilderness, right? So that story and many others in your Bible, when you read of people going from one location to another, it wasn't always highways and byways where you could make a pit stop and get your Slurpee filled up. It's going through this kind of wasteland and desert land. So it was dangerous. It's still now, if you were to walk it or hike it now, dangerous, barren, harsh. But these are the places, as we looked at this, we didn't hike down to this, but I've got some canyon pictures here in a moment. You think of all the ways that God used those moments in the characters of the Bible, their stories and the nation of Israel, and he used them for intimacy, used them for reminders of his providence, of his care, his ability to get them exactly what they needed on a day-to-day basis. And it kind of, you don't want to go there because you think, who would ever go there? It's like anytime I go to Nevada, I'm like, why does civilization even exist here? There's no water. It's barren land. But that is where God does his best work in many of our lives as we look back. And we say, everything was stripped away, and I had to rely on God. I had to figure out a way, moment to moment, day by day, rely on God. Because the land's not going to produce it. The only way I'm getting out of here is with God's hand. So the wilderness causes dependence. It draws us close to God. It anchors us to God, who ultimately is the life giver. Another place we went to is the city of Herodium. This is Herod the Great is in our Bibles for just like a short snippet. And then you get his sons and descendants of his as Jesus' story unfolds, as he's just a little guy. But Herod's the one that's tracking down Jesus in our Christmas story. He's the one who doesn't like the idea of a king being born. He's the one who wants Jesus dead. And so this is one of his, there's many in Israel. I'll have pictures of a few more, but this is one of his massive sites that he built. It's Herodium because it's named after himself. This was a palace that he would go to. He could entertain guests and other dignitaries and, impress anyone. He was part Jewish, part Roman. He was the Roman kind of outpost overseer of this land to keep the peace with the Jews. And he could kind of ride the fence between the Jewish people and the Roman government that was overseeing and overtook the Jewish land. And so he built this. These are some of the remains. Some of it's kind of pieced back together. This is a humongous site. I don't know if you can see it, but there's 3 people kind of left, center, and middle, I guess, of that picture. There's 3 little tiny people there. It's a humongous site up on a hillside. And somehow this guy figured out in the ancient world how to get water uphill. There's no natural source that's going up there that flows up. And he just probably slave labor, to be honest. But he built some amazing, amazing sites. When you're up on top of this, looking back down, this is about, I'm trying to remember, I think it's within 5 miles of Bethlehem. It's close, just a little bit south and I think a little bit east. This is looking down, and it's hard to see here. I think I got a zoomed up picture. Can you see that square and then a circle in the middle? That's his pool that he built. And he was so precise. All of his buildings and palaces and different structures that he built, they were all ridiculously precise. Like things would point true north, and you go like, gosh, this guy was dead on, way 2,000 plus years ago, and south or east or what, And this one actually points, it's off from north just a little bit. And so people think that he built that pool facing directly towards Jerusalem. And he was just so precise. He's the one who some of those building blocks that we're seeing up on the screen that were so tight, no mortar needed, cut with precision, reliefs that were new. Those were fancy back then to have a relief on a piece of stone. He would have those. And he was building wonders of the world. Like he grew up, I think he lived till he was like 40, and he built all over the country, just massive structures, massive building sites. And he had such precision. As I was up there, I was thinking, gosh, this guy was unstoppable. I mean, he's getting water up hills. I'll talk about this in a moment, but he builds another palace in Caesarea on the sea, not Caesarea Philippi, but Caesarea Maritime on the sea. He builds a he, he builds a freshwater pool in the middle of a port, basically, just because he can. He's like, what would be great is if I had some fresh water here, because the sea's the sea's another couple feet, and I don't want to. I just want some fresh water. So anyways, and he when I was sitting up there, I was just in awe of this guy's building prowess and the fact that he still has buildings standing today. And I was thinking he had such power and such precision, and yet in the story of Jesus, Herod, with all that power and precision, has it out for Jesus, and he can't get him. It's just a miracle story in the world's eyes, in human terms. This guy could do anything he wanted, and he can't even get to a baby that's 5 miles away. The sovereignty of God at play, and God's hand in the story of Jesus, and even as an infant who he couldn't protect himself, and God was in control. Herod had no say in the matter. He had no real ultimate power because God's power was over the whole thing. He couldn't pinpoint Jesus. Jesus is born, and he can't track him down. He can't even find him. God's plan prevailed. I was just sitting there thinking, he was so precise, and yet he couldn't even get a little baby. He couldn't even track down Jesus. Another kind of shifting from south of Jerusalem a little bit and moving up kind of north in between Jerusalem and up into Nazareth. This is the Sataf. This is looking south up on the screen, kind of upper left corner over that hillside. You're getting back into where Jerusalem is. And this was a really cool hike we got to do. This is a short little look at some terrace gardening and farming. So we got to make some observations down the way and see how this land is still to this day extremely fertile on this hillside, but they had to figure out how are we going to farm a hill? And we're not talking about just like rolling hills that you might go out on Boatingheimer or whatever and go like, okay, we can figure that out. This is like down a cliff, down into a valley. And so what they would do is they would basically cut into the mountain, move dirt around, build walls, and then they would build their gardens. They would build grapevines and build walls. They would go down. What they would do is they would go down to the bottom of the valley, scoop up the dirt. They build these walls on the hillside, scoop up the dirt, and bring it back up. And can you imagine how many weeks and months it would take to flatten a piece of land on the side of a hill? And not only that, if they planted vineyards, grape vineyards, it would take, I think the math on that was like sometimes 5 years. Like you'd plant the stalk, and then 5 years later you would have grapes. That's on top of the building of the structure to get there. This is along the Sorek Valley. That's a word for stalk in Hebrew. So think like a starter plant. These aren't from seed, and let's see. Here's a path. This is along the way of those terraces. It's probably one of my favorite spots that we got to go to, kind of off the beaten path. And these byways here, these are like the ones mentioned. You see this sometimes in Scripture, in Judges, the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, days of Jael. The highways were abandoned. So those main patriarchal highways up on the mountaintops, they used these ones. The travelers kept the byways. You see that in Scripture. This is the kind of picture you can have in mind. These little byways. Just keeping yourself out of sight, out of harm's way, trying to keep out of the way of those who might be coming after you. This is a look at some of those terrace gardens. You can kind of see down, and then that flattens out, and those are actually vineyards down below. Super pretty. Makes you think of like Greece or something like that. But this is right in the heartland of Israel. This is 30-minute drive maybe from the wasteland that I showed you. That's how close these things are. This would be, we have some of that in Oregon. You can get to deserts in Oregon, but you have to drive quite a ways, or you can get to the high desert, drive a couple hours that way. But this is like I showed you, it's just a sliver of land. This is similar to, gosh, I probably don't have time for this. Read Isaiah 5 if you get a chance tonight. Some of you might be familiar with that, but that's God's picture of dealing with Israel, and he refers to them as a garden that he's planting and tending, and they are not obedient, and they're not in line with his ways and his will for their life. And so this story in Isaiah 5 of him tending the garden and what's he going to do with this wily, kind of wild vineyard that's gone haywire. What's he going to do in Isaiah 5 is a great look at that. We don't have time to read through that. This is Wilderness is in. This is in the South Negev. Probably part of Israel's wandering through the 40 years of wandering that we read about in Scripture. Part of this, I didn't know that was a picture. Oh, it's sliding. There we go. Okay. I did do that. I forgot. Let me get to this next picture here. Okay. We took a little hike through the Wilderness is in. Amazing. One of the highlights of the trip. This is part of our group. We had like 30 people that we didn't know before and got to know very well, some of them, as we rode around, ate meals and all that stuff. But this is us going into a canyon or a valley, super high walls all around us. And this is a picture. This is the Valley of Zin. This is one picture of just a little bit of water resource there. Super high cliffs on both sides. Here's another picture. You probably can't quite see it, but at the end of this, there's actually a little waterfall that drops over the edge and kind of fills that pool down below. Here is us climbing back out, about halfway back up the side of that valley. And then this is a picture of us at the top looking back down. The waterfall is kind of off in the distance there. You can't really see it probably from where you're sitting, but way, way, way far down, several hundred feet down to the bottom. And we hiked from one end and came up out the other side. And as I was down there, I could not help but think of, what would you do if you're down here? You're running from your enemies and they're up above you, right? You're down in the shadows, right? And I could not help but think of like Psalm 23, right? You're down in the valley of the shadow of death. And there's times when there is no water down there, right? There's no sustenance that'll keep you going. And so the idea of, especially, we're in a group of, there's probably 20 or 25 of us that made this part. Some people chose not to, or they couldn't physically quite make it back out or whatever. But just imagine you're down there alone, and the heart of Psalm 23 comes to mind, right? David writes with such confidence, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me, right? And he's trusting in God, that God is with him. God will provide. He'll even give him victory over his enemies. Can you imagine? Enemies are somewhere up above you. Maybe you get glimpses of them, or we saw some goats like scurrying along. Just imagine if those were enemies, bows drawn, looking down on you. And David has the utmost confidence that he is going to kind of dine and scoff in the face of his enemies because of God's protection and providence. And so it's just this great picture as you're in the context of the Bible to think about the Bible that you've read over and over and go, oh my gosh, I knew that. I could picture something like that in my mind, but now I'm sitting in it. And many times while we're over there, we're just going like, this kind of just opens up the Bible in a brand new way to us. I'm going to fly through some of this. This is called the Super Bowl. This is also in the Negev. There's this huge desertous land, but it's this kind of carved out of the earth. It looks like someone, not Super Bowl like football, obviously, but someone just carved out a bowl out in the wilderness. This picture is kind of looking down into that, and there's no way you can see it, but if your eyes are somehow crazy enough, good. That ledge is up on the left. There's like little dinky white dots. Those are some people from our group that were like hanging over the edge, looking down into the bowl that's like hundreds of feet below. That's for some of our classmates. This is Masada. I'm going to go quickly through this. Masada looking down. This is another one of Herod's sites that he builds. The Romans built a siege ramp to come up this and fight the Jews around 60 AD. This is also looking down from Masada. You can see the outlines of some Roman structures, a siege line, hemming in the Jews who lived there. Basically, the Romans came in and just said, "We're surrounding you until you like give up." And eventually, the Romans came up and sieged the walls and took them out. This is looking northeast from Masada. Off in the distance, that's the Dead Sea. Off in the distance, inside this city, it's another huge structure. There's a picture of Stacy and I. There's some old walls. Some of these are like ancient structures. Sometimes they come in and they'll mark the walls off with what was ancient and where they've kind of recreated some of the walls. This is, again, from the top looking back, more of the Dead Sea off in the distance. Just this humongous structure. Here's a picture of the Dead Sea. Stacy's one of these are some other ladies from our group, and you really can just sit down and you float, and it's the craziest thing. And again, Bonnie brought some little salt crystal balls. I don't know what you call those, but you just kind of walk around and you're like, what is that under my feet? And it's just this clump of crystallized salt. And so crazy warm and fun to go in. So this is the En-Gedi. This is a strip of desert and nothingness. And all of a sudden, there's a stream of water, waterfalls. And this is a little kind of almost cave-like part of this. So it's just a really cool setting because in the midst of barren land, you have the En-Gedi and this little source of refreshment in the midst of nothing. Makes me think of Psalm 42. Many of you know that. As the deer pants for water, so my soul longs for you. Just coming out of the desert, going like, where are we gonna get any kind of refreshment? And here's this out of nowhere paradise. Here's me coming out of the waterfall, getting cooled off. And here's a picture I took of the waterfall, kind of looking back up, sun coming through. You wouldn't know by looking at any of these last 3 pictures, but literally like 200 yards either side of this little hike you can go up, and it's just nothing. There's no vegetation, no wildlife, and in the midst of this is just a little teeny tiny strip of wildlife. We saw wildlife there, tons of water, vegetation, and really amazing. Got to see the Dead Sea Scroll Caves, Qumran Caves. This was a humongous, we won't be able to go into this. We just got a few more moments here before I try and honor your time, get you out of here quickly. But the Dead Sea Scrolls were a humongous find in the 50s. And they had whole sections of Scripture and books of Scripture that were found in the 50s in these caves that gave a very assured confidence for readers of the Bible and historians to know that the Bible that we hold on to and read from is the same Bible that's been passed down for generations. And so they were able to find these scrolls in the original language in Hebrew and these scrolls and go, let's pull out the book of Isaiah and let's translate it and see if it still matches up through all the different translations and into whatever language you're reading it in. And by golly, it's like deadly accurate. So most of those were found in the 50s. This is one of it's hard to see, but there's a little door basically that goes into a cave, and some people stumbled across that and they've been digging it out. They're still trying to see if they can find more skulls back there. That's the ancient city of Qumran. Probably a group of Essenes, if you're familiar with that, not to get too deep into the waters, probably lived there and copied scriptures. Like that was their life. They just, from generation to generation, copied scriptures and tried to live out a very conservative, faithful Jewish life. And that's what we know as the Dead Sea Scrolls. So yeah, they just like, they were the scrolls, like, or they were scribes, just word for word, day after day. And history probably tells us that they were attacked at some point, and their caves were hiding these scrolls in pottery pieces, big jars, and saved them for like a couple thousand years. So this is a look inside the city of Qumran, and that's right next to that cave that I showed you. Here's us riding some camels. We'll keep moving. Sorry, you want to go back? Okay. There it is. Sebast is formerly known as Samaria. So if you go there, you might get to ride a camel. There's a theater at Caesarea Maritime. This is another one of those sites. I mentioned it earlier that King Herod built. This is the pool that I mentioned, freshwater pool. That is salt water that you see all around. That's the Mediterranean. You can go out from there. You can reach to Rome or Greece or wherever. And he decided to build a freshwater pool because he could. And he built a port. It was the first port between, I think, Tyre and like way down south, maybe almost into Egypt area, like right in the middle of that long stretch. And he's said to be the first to use underwater concrete to build this port because it was too shallow for big ships to come in. And he built it right there on the shoreline. There's a big palace. Here's another picture. This is a hippodrome there at Caesarea. And we got a chance to kind of reflect on this area because this is like the story of Cornelius, Acts 10. You know that story, the sheet coming down? And this whole break in the story of God of not just being a story of God's favor on the Jews, but now open to the Gentiles. And the sheet comes down with all the meat, and there's all kinds of confusion by the people trying to figure out what this vision is. That happened right here in the city. And it just so happened that Herod also built this port that opened up the country of Israel to the west. And it was really cool for me to sit back and think, like, here's this guy Herod, who is playing the line between the Roman Empire and the Jewish people, building this city for his own purpose, for his own pleasure, for his own power and his own gain. And God totally uses it to be a launching point with that story of Cornelius and Peter for the gospel to go out. I mean, it went out. The story of the book of Acts is amazing. It starts in Jerusalem and just is this ripple echoing effect of the gospel going to the ends of the earth. And God used this port right here. Let me just go quickly through some of this, and some of this you might go, oh yeah, I know a story about that, and some of you might go, I have no idea what that means. I'm just going to blitz through it because we're running out of time. This is looking. Let me see if I can get. Oh, where is it? Okay, there it is. Okay, that T is Mount Tabor. That's Mount Tabor, the top of Mount Tabor. Hill of Moreh is the M there, and Mount Gilboa. This is looking from another mountaintop, kind of looking out that way. This is looking into Nazareth from Mount Precipice. That's the city Jesus grew up in. So it's cool to just be up on this hill going, I wonder if Jesus came up here. I wonder if he came up here as a kid, as a youth. Did he, I don't know, play hide and go seek up here? Or did he pray up here? Did he come up and look over the city and wonder where God was going to lead him? From that same mountaintop, looking south and east, that's Mount Tabor again on the left, Hill of Moreh on the right. And then this one is the same mountaintop, so just kind of a 360. Mount Carmel off in the distance, backdrop on the right there. You can kind of see it off to the right. And then this is some stuff, Sea of Galilee. This is looking down onto the northern part of the Sea of Galilee. Off in the distance, straight across is Capernaum. That's Jesus' ministry base for most of his ministry phase, the last 3 years of his life. And some of us got to hike down this really high point. I didn't realize Galilee was surrounded by such steep cliffs. Actually, the Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea is, what was it, like 1,200 feet below sea level? It's the lowest point on planet Earth. Galilee is actually below sea level too. I had no idea. Anyways, we got to hike down, really cool hike, and this is looking kind of Galilee, north end of the Galilee at my back, looking up into something called the Horns of Hittim. The winds kind of get funneled through here and pushed into the Sea of Galilee. It causes at times those crazy choppy storms. The Sea of Galilee is not that big. It's not really a sea. It's a lake. But through this tunnel, that kind of just, like, think rapids, but with air, right? It just gets squeezed. Sometimes rapids on rivers are made because the banks get tighter. It's not because there's rocks underneath or whatever. And that happens with wind here, and it can cause waves 5 feet high right in the middle of a small lake. So think of the stories of Jesus falling asleep, right? The disciples out in the storm on a boat. Probably caused right through here. I think this is a video I took, and you can just hear the wind whipping And this is a pretty calm day. Like the water was not choppy. It's just coming straight through the valley, right onto the north end of the sea. And so you just get a sense of like, oh my gosh, if this just escalated, I can imagine the water's getting crazy. We got to hang out on the Sea of Galilee, take a little swim. I'm one of those bobbing heads back there. It was a great time. This is the Jordan River just before it dumps into the Sea of Galilee. From what we learned, it's flowing like 2% of what it used to flow at in antiquity. There's 4 springs that feed the Jordan River. I'll show a couple of pictures of those in a moment. Real quickly, this is inside of Hazor. It's a Canaanite temple. This is evidence. Most people agree this is evidence of Joshua coming in, and part of his conquering conquest as he entered the land. And the reason why it's proof is they have burn marks that they can somehow figure out that the temperature of the burn marks got like 2,300 degrees. It caused the basalt foundation to crack in these stone rocks. They also excavated and found 3 feet of ash there. So it's kind of cool to say, like, wow, this isn't just a story. This is actually history that we see in our Bibles. This is a look at the Canaanite temple that's there. There's a modern structure over the top of that that's providing shelter. There's some people meeting in there that you might be able to see if you look, kind of squint your eyes. And this is mud brick walls. This is not stone. This is crazy. Mud brick walls for thousands of years that they're uncovering, and they're still, like, just if you went outside with some mud and you made a little structure, can you imagine it lasting thousands of years? This is crazy. So Joshua comes in, and part of the conquest, following God's leading, takes that Canaanite city down, and it's part of that entering into the promised land. This is the spring water at Dan, 2,000 gallons per second flowing out of this spring. This is one of the 4 springs that feeds the Jordan River. It's the largest limestone spring in the Middle East. This is Dan's city wall. Again, some of this is rebuilt to show you what it would look like, but there are parts of this that are ancient, a couple thousand plus years old. This is mud brick city gate entering Laish, later called Dan after Joshua conquered it. This is a mud constructed wall and city gate that dates back to Abraham. Let's think of Abraham. And many people think Abraham entered through this gate. So we're talking thousands upon thousands of years ago, and somehow it gets covered over. They uncover it, and because it gets covered over, it's not exposed to the elements, and they're able to see this mud entrance here. This is Caesarea Philippi. You might have heard that in textbooks or in your Bible. This site has had many different civilizations be part of it. The Greeks were here. They worshiped the god Pan. Pan was the god of fertility. So you see goats and man images and all this fertility stuff. This is another one of the springs that feeds the Jordan. And I'll just quickly breeze through that. This is us on the Sea of Galilee. We got to take a little boat ride across. We ended up in Capernaum. And just got to think about how Jesus starts his ministry here. There's some sites over there. Potentially Peter started a church there near a synagogue. And you get to see these little homes that people built. And in fact, yes, I do have one right here. This is, I didn't write this down correctly. This is an ancient style of house where you would build and then you would add on to it. You've probably heard that like someone preaching through a text. John 14 is one of those. The style of house Jesus might be referring to when he says, my Father's got a house. It's got many rooms. And he's probably thinking of this. You build a house, your son gets married, or you add someone to the family, and you just build on right next to it. So these are kind of the foundation building blocks of those structures. You can see some people, these walls are maybe shoulder to head height. They would have built up over the top. Here's an old, ancient, probably not reconditioned, but like remade or a modern take on what an olive press looked like. This is in Chorazin. Kind of wheel it around on top of the olives, press out the oil out the side and collect it. This is looking south from that same spot. The Sea of Galilee is way off in the background. So this is north of the Sea of Galilee. This is kind of gives you an idea of the landscape up there. And this is a first century. I got a couple more slides. First century synagogue at Magdala, Mary of Magdalene. This is where she's from. This is a really interesting site. So Jesus enters synagogues in the first century, right? But the temple is still around. Kind of an interesting thing that I've never really thought, well, how did that work? Like, because synagogues are around now, but there's no temple. So anyways, they more on that maybe some other day. But this is some of the ground in there in Magdala. So you can see the mosaic tiles on the kind of closest to us. So very fascinating. This is a synagogue, Jewish synagogue, and yet you see the Hellenistic influence in the finishes of this. So the Greek finishes inside of a Jewish, like an Orthodox Jewish place of worship. So the temple's still alive and well. Jesus is showing up in a place like this. He's teaching. He's opening up the scrolls and teaching. And this kind of, at that time, complemented what was happening in the temple if you were too far away, and kind of supplemented what was happening. Just a couple pictures of some mosaics of the church in Magdala. Here's a mosaic. This is Jesus walking on the water. You got Peter there falling, slipping into the water. These are a lot of teeny tiles. And then this is a boat. And out the back there, it looks like a painting, but that's literally the Sea of Galilee. There's a church, and that's the Sea of Galilee behind you. So, like, I was like, dang, look at that. So I took a picture. And down in the basement of this building, just amazing art all over this place. But this is a painting in the basement. You see Jesus there and someone trying to touch, get something from him and touch and get healed. And so that is a lot of talking, a lot of slides. If you need to go, thanks for hanging out, and I went a little bit over. I was trying to be done by 7:30. If you need to go, please feel free to go. Some of you might have questions, and it might be a question that someone else has, so I'll hang out up here, raise your hand, ask a question. If that doesn't go very long or not at all, then I'll just go hang out by the table back there. Bonnie, are you cool hanging out back there in case people have any questions? But yeah, please, if you need to go, or you got kids or whatever, go for it. But go ahead, Wayne. We have a lot of potatoes left. Yes. There you go. Put them in the fridge. Yes, we could use some help putting stuff away. Yes, Jerry. So Jerry's asking, now that we've seen this and we've kind of walked where Jesus walked, what does that do for kind of me personally? Honestly, probably the number one thing, this probably doesn't sound that significant, but as I'm reading scripture now, like places like kind of stop me in my tracks. I'm going like, what does that mean? Like where is that? You know, sometimes you're just reading a story in the Gospels or wherever, and you're like, I don't know where that is. Just get me to Jesus. Like, get me to the people. And so being in the land makes me think like, or being in the Bible and seeing the land in person makes me think like, okay, they're going from here to here. Where did they go? And what did that mean for them? And how did that affect their personal walk with the Lord? And then what does that look like for me? So yeah. Yeah. Was the water clear? Well, you probably saw that first picture of the Jordan. No. Yeah, because it's pretty stagnant where that was. But those springs are pretty clear. Yeah. It's flowing fast. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the buildings with the blocks. Not really. She's asking if they talked about how they made the blocks that made up the buildings. Not really. They were just going like, this is crazy. Especially the ones that Herod had influence over. Just saying like, this was cut this precise and stacked against this one that was this precise. There's nothing in between them. They didn't, at least, no, we didn't hear any of what tools they used or what kind of technology was used. Other than just, whoa, look at that. It's pretty wild though. Yes, Roger. Where do we sign up? Just send me an email and maybe I'll make a list. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Okay. Oh yeah. 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 So she's asking what were the accommodations as we traveled, and then was there any dress codes? I think in general, when we went into a church or something that was sacred, like a church, um, long pants and covered shoulders was what we were instructed. But just around town, I mean, it's very modern. Like if you're in the city of Jerusalem, just you could wear whatever. And then our accommodations, we stayed inside the old city, which was great. All the hustle and bustle of the old city, and it was very nice. Yeah, it wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, and the food was good at the hotel we stayed at. And then most of the hotels we stayed at were pretty similar. I don't know what the stars ratings are. Maybe I'll give it a 3. Like it was as nice as anything or nicer than I would stay in here. When we went south to a place called Arad, and from there we went up to the Dead Sea and kind of the south wilderness of Zin. Some of those pictures, those accommodations were a little bit dated and not quite as pristine, but still fine. 2 stars for those hotels. Very comfortable. We felt very safe. But if you've never traveled and seen military packing, that might freak you out a little bit. But if you've been to Mexico and you got stopped on your way through Mexico by someone with a machine gun, and you go, that's weird. But at this point, you're like, this just is what it is. I came out the other side safe. You probably won't feel any different over there. We did go. Bethlehem is in a Palestinian-controlled area, so you go through a checkpoint, and it's very plainly says like if you're an Israelite, do not come in. Like you are risking your life, not just your limbs, your life. So that's kind of weird to see, but if you're an American like me, you just do whatever the guide tells you. Go ahead, Bonnie. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we felt safe. It's very high tourist areas. Most of these places we went to were technically national parks. So it's like there's bathrooms, there's a little store, you get some ice cream. You're feeling pretty good. Yeah. Yes, I think most of the time we were there. So we were there basically about a week, about the 12th of June or 14th, something like that, up until just before the 4th of July. I thought it was pretty similar to what you would experience about now in Central Oregon, like Redmond Bend, Eagle Crest. Low 90s, real hot, like the sun is on top of you, but not like super humid. It wasn't like it was muggy at all. It was just intense on top of your head, especially if you're bald. Yeah. Hot, but not crazy. I've been in Hades, way hotter. I've been to Belize, way hotter, just because of the mugginess and the weight of the air, I guess. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, I didn't show any pictures. Golgotha and Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Via Dolorosa, which is basically taking you through the city and Stations of the Cross. Yes, we did do some of that. I just didn't show any of those pictures. And I would say more often than not, if something significant happened, usually the history is after Constantine, 300 AD, when it was lawful to be a Christian, so to speak, like you weren't getting persecuted for it, then the church at that time said, we think this is where Jesus was crucified. We think this is where Jesus was born. We think this miracle happened here, and they put a church there. And so a lot of those churches are still standing today, or they've been rebuilt on top of those places that once were a different church at some point. So yes, we did go to some of those. A lot of those are right there in and around the old city of Jerusalem. Yeah. I think there's debate. Some people think it's outside the city walls. I think biblically speaking, it makes more sense that it's inside. Yeah, just because where the Temple Mount still is where the temple would have been in Jesus' time, the temple that King Herod built. And Pontius Pilate's palace would have been on the opposite side of the city, most likely. And then all that. And the city walls were different. City walls back then are not the city walls today. Some of them are, but some of them are the same, but some of them got expanded. But so yeah, it's some of that stuff's just kind of a guessing game, but it's still cool to say like this isn't commemoration of the event of Jesus' death or his resurrection or the Garden of Gethsemane, same thing. So my favorite spot was probably the hike through the wilderness is in. Yeah, that stuff I mentioned about Psalm 23. And then honestly, that terrace area was really cool. The farming and just reading Isaiah 5 was cool. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, she's asking how far south did we go? No, I don't think we got close enough to Egypt to feel feel anything there. There was a part of our group went on to Petra. You end up going into Jordan, and we did not do that little extension. So we went basically as far south as the south end of the Dead Sea, but west of it, if that makes sense. So not super, kind of on the edge of the wilderness that I think of the Israelites wandering. Yeah. So not terribly. We went all the way up to the north border, though, and looked up and like to where, looking out towards like Damascus. Yeah. Yep. Yes. How do people treat us? Kind. Yeah. Hospitable. Yeah. A lot of English there, and yeah. I mean, they want your money too, so. Yeah. Yeah. No, they treated us kind. Yeah. Okie dokie. Thanks everyone for coming.